Hey, team players, and welcome back. A little delay here on the kickoff, but we're excited to be here. Bob, last week going 4-2, getting the winning percentage up again over 60% and keeping it there. Always a good and awesome thing. It was a fun year, Bob. We got a league champion in the house as my co-host, so always good to win it all.
True facts.
We know that last week we had a lot of our listeners here in the finals, so to keep everyone moving strong, we're loving it. So where do you want to start off, Bob, with projections for who's going to win these games, for
I think
recap of who we hated, who loved us? Where do you want to go?
I think if we're starting off, I think one thing that we need to go back and do is kind of just look at these NFL players right now and where their rankings are, and just talk a little bit about some of the guys that were surprising to be in the list of top 15 statistical players in their, categories. So wide receiver, running back, quarterback, all that stuff.
Yeah, it'd be a great start.
So where I'd like to kind of start at here is wide receiver. We often got this year a lot of questions about who should we start at wide receiver, talking about PPR targets and thinking about who has big play potential and all of that. And one of the guys that I think is
Bob flickered there. He's back. All right.
I just think is so fascinating. And it's a Steelers guy. It's George Pickens. So I want to bring this up because I saw this. I can't remember where I saw it at, but looking at
he's top 15 in PPR.
This is a statistical craziness. No, he only has 63 receptions this year, but he has over 1,000 yards.
It's a lot.
And the only other players in the top 12 under 90 receptions are Mike Evans at number 10, Amari Cooper at number 8, and DJ Moore, and then Brandon Ayuk at 6. Brandon Ayuk has 1,317 yards on 72 catches. I want to talk about this because the difference that we talk about in terms of PPR versus standard, right? And teams that go with big plays versus just dink and duck targets. Because when we change this whole narrative and we look at reception totals in general, George Pickens is sitting all the way down at number 47 in terms of receptions. And so I just kind of want to go through a couple of these guys that were tops in receptions, but maybe not in terms of yards too. And just when you hear a player that you want to talk about, say something. All right.
Well, Pickens to me is a fascinating story because you look at that volume, that average, it's like, why the hell aren't you giving the ball more? And when you go moving forward, is that something that will get rectified next year? And to me, that's the exercise I want to take forward this, Bob, is next year, should they be on the radars or not? Will they be overrated or underrated? Because there's a couple of people that I know we're going to get to that I want to chat with. Dude, you're blocking the camera.
Absolutely. That I definitely want to get to that. What?
Your hand was blocking the camera. All I saw was your fingers.
So, couple of the guys here. Number 1 in receptions throughout the season so far. Our fantasy seasons are over, so we're just taking these numbers here. CeeDee Lamb.
Sure.
Tyreek. Amon-Ra. Keenan Allen. A.J. Brown. Evan Ingram. Michael Pittman. Adam Thielen. Puka. And Stephon Diggs.
So as we pause there, the only couple on that list that I see diminishing in terms of their volume is going to be Allen, because Allen got his dramatically inflated with the Mike Williams injury. I see that certainly happening. Evan Ingram, maybe. I mean, that one is a surprise to me of the list. But most of them there, I mean, they're not going to stop giving the ball to CeeDee Lamb or Diggs. I mean, that ain't happening. The rest of them, when you look at those are the focal points of their offense. And the only one of that entire group that might even get challenged is Tyreek. And that's just because Waddle was that good. And
Yeah.
AJ Brown is cemented there. I look at that and say, none of those would I be worried about taking early next year. Like I said, with the exception of maybe Keenan Allen, I think all of those guys, it's reasonable to expect the same amount of volume.
Mhm.
Obviously, they all can be tweaked minorly. Like, for
Right.
instance, if Dallas gets a real running back, CD might come down, but it's not going to be a night and day change.
It doesn't. You're right. It doesn't feel like that.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like that's going to happen. Now, when you're talking about volume, that's in terms of, the reception totals here. But when we go to total targets, that top 10 changes a little bit.
Okay. Who's in it that's not now?
So CD is still at 1 in terms of both receptions and targets, and number 2 in total yards. But the next 2 are some spicy candidates for next year, where we have Davante Adams and Garrett Wilson. Davante Adams had the second highest number of targets at 167. So those targets that we talked about at the beginning of the year were still there for Davante Adams.
Yeah, they were.
But his receptions went to 98. Still went over 1,000 yards. Still went over 1,000 yards. Still had 7 touchdowns. And Garrett Wilson, which is another guy that we said the volume was going to be there, but we were concerned about how many receptions he was going to make. And that was with Aaron Rodgers. So, take that with a grain of salt. But he had 1,008 yards on 93 receptions on 163 targets. The rest of that top 10 doesn't really pivot much outside of taking Evan Ingram out of it, because the next ones on this list are Tyreek, AJ Brown, Amon-Ra, Puka, Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, Michael Pittman.
So you go through that, and my takeaway is, well, we shouldn't be downgrading Adams as much as he is, which he certainly is downgraded. There's no way around that, but he's not a 4th round value guy anymore. That kind of targets share by himself should be early 2nd round. People are not going to view him like that next year. You're going to be able to get him at that second turn, at the late 2nd, early 3rd, and he's a guy who could really take over leagues for you. Wilson is the one, on the other hand, that I am concerned about, because it's basically you're going to be betting on, do you believe in Rodgers? And do you believe in Rodgers' crazy healing? And I don't think I believe in Rodgers, period.
Right.
So when I look at that, I do think that there is some significant more concern. I would downgrade Garrett Wilson more than Davante Adams. And it's mostly because the Jets are a dysfunctional train wreck. I don't understand how Saleh is getting a free pass again. And he was involved with the Zach Wilson from the beginning. And he basically said yesterday he's never playing another game as a Jet. So, I don't get how there's not ramifications on that front office there. Right. And even with Rodgers coming in, they don't have a line. That defense that was supposed to be so vaunted, when we look at it right now sitting here, is essentially mid. When you look at points being allowed, the New York Jets are going to be right here in this not impressive, not unimpressive, when we were slated as seeing them as being, hey, they're going to be a top 10 unit. Well, they're only up 22 points a game. That's right there in the mid. By the way, their offense is the 4th worst in points scored. And I get Rodgers isn't there, but look at another Hall of Fame quarterback that went out, and they went through 2 backups. The Steelers, the year Ben got hurt, averaged 18 with essentially the same skill level of a roster. So the Jets, to me, are in a complete quandary, and I don't think I want to touch them. And when we get to the running back conversation, I don't think I want to touch the other New York team either.
So I do want to bring up a couple anomalies that I think are worth talking about. Before we do get to the running backs, and my last guy will be a nice transition into that running back market as well. So one of the things that I think is really interesting when we look at how this year has shaken down a lot is these wide receivers that can be gotten in. So it's more of a credence that you don't have to go wide receiver heavy early, like we had been saying at the beginning of our draft. Now, mind you that a lot of those wide receivers that were at the top of this list.
Well, CD was what, the fourth receiver off the board. Tyreek was the second.
AJ, Amon-Ra, those guys, and Jamar Chase is still up there somewhere too.
Are any of them not third rounder hires? I guess Puka.
In a way, yes. So I want to bring a couple of those things up. Okay. The number one that was much maligned going into the season was DJ Moore. DJ Moore ended the fantasy season with 92 receptions, 1,300 yards, 8 touchdowns. That is super solid. And typically speaking, DJ Moore was going in that 3rd, 4th round area. Brandon Ayuk, another one, going lower than that in a way. So I bring this up for this reason, is that Brandon Ayuk, George Pickens, Amari Cooper, DK Metcalf, and Mike Evans were top 8 in terms of average yards per reception here. Now, they all got over 1,000 yards, obviously, because they had that high average. And their touchdowns are sitting at 7, 5, 5, 8, 13. Which one of these guys do you think has the best chance to continue to replicate those stats going into next year? And mind you, this is on each one of them. The lowest one with that, the person on this list with the lowest amount of yak was Amari Cooper at 271. The reason I bring this up is because there's other guys on this list that potentially are some interesting candidates for next year that are Noah Brown and Josh Palmer. And this is, mind you, this is only the top 10.
Okay.
I'm only going off the top 10 here.
So before there's so many names to go through the first 3 you gave me there.
Who
was
out of those guys
Puka, Moore,
has a chance there?
Yeah, so it was
Ayuk,
Puka,
Pickens,
Moore, and Cooper.
Not Puka. Ayuk, Pickens, Cooper, Metcalf, Evans. Because remember, going into the season, we didn't think highly of Tampa at all, and we weren't sure what Evans would be back. And this is like another consecutive season where he has 1,000 yards, and he's balling out.
So let's just go through each of them individually and talk about how strong their arrows are going up and going down. The first one you said there was DJ Moore. So DJ Moore, to me, is probably the biggest surprise of all of them. And that's mostly because Fields developed in a way that I didn't expect. Fields has gotten better, and I did not expect that at all. They already said that they're keeping the entire GM staff and coaching staff in Chicago. So with that being said, it's reasonable to expect that DJ Moore and Fields will continue to grow. I don't know if they're going to continue to grow to the point where I'm comfortable taking them above the 4th round, but I do believe that you will see them continue to grow. Again, if I go out of order, Bob, I apologize. Just hit the ones I missed. Amari Cooper, on the other hand, I'm very concerned about next year. I think he's going to be one of the more overrated receivers for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, the majority of this production was not done with Watson. He got hotter as the year went on. And if you listen to the way he's communicating...
Because somebody could throw him the ball.
Well, yeah. He's in love with Flacco. Oh, yeah. And should Cleveland win a playoff game and Flacco leave, even if Flacco doesn't leave, they have major problems in Cleveland for this fact. Next year, 2024, simultaneously, Myles Garrett's contract in terms of cap hit explodes, and so does Watson's. And they really will not have the ability to slump off the hit. So this is the all or nothing year for the Browns now, which means they're going to shed cap hits left and right next year. So the overall expectation of the Cleveland roster is going to be diminished in 24 compared to 23.
Mhm.
And taking that to the next step, they already don't have a number 2 receiver. And
Mhm.
part of Cooper taking off was Njoku taking off. I don't see Njoku doing this without Flacco. And when you look at this, because ultimately what I'm saying is Watson is a worse quarterback than Flacco, and the stats are
I
bearing
don't
that
think
out.
anybody would I don't think at this point in time anybody would disagree with you on that.
Well, I mean, you can make the argument Flacco throws interceptions like crazy, which he does.
Well, he does that, but the point I'm making there is that Flacco puts them in situations to win.
Yes,
And
Flacco's pushing the ball down much further than than Watson did,
and he's
which
got
is
the old Brett Favre mentality of the gunslinger. So
he also has literally nothing to lose. What's he going to do? Lose his job again?
Exactly. He's going to put you in position to win, and he's going to do his best to do that. And if he throws 2 or 3 interceptions, this Cleveland defense is one of the best defenses that we've seen in fantasy football and in the league in the last 2 or 3 years.
Oh, yeah.
It's something that Cleveland was building up to. And it was something that you saw glimpses of last year, but they played greater than their potential this year. And you saw that. And so you're allowed, when you have a defense this good, you are allowed to take risks. And to be honest with you, the way that the running backs have worked out for them this year, with both Ford and Hunt, before we get to that, you got to think at some point in time, Chubb's going to be back next year as well. And so this is a team that, with the right quarterback, which they seem to have right, I'm not going to overtalk them, but when you say at the end of the season, Joe Flacco's getting benched to save him for the playoffs, that's a weird sentence. That's a sentence that nary has said in our whole entire lives. And that it's said about the Cleveland Browns version of Joe Flacco.
The Cleveland Browns quarterback, period.
It's interesting because Amari Cooper's stats, yes, he has, outside of that 50-point game, Amari Cooper averaged 83 yards a game on average, so his yak though isn't great. So he's getting
that's the bigger issue with me.
A lot of play similar to a guy like Zay Flowers. Like when I look on this list here, and I've got to really search for Zay. I might even have to go to another page and show more.
We'll do the rookies separately, but I guess my answer to this is because Cooper has a low yak, he's going to have less around him. I don't see the upside potential. And the fact that I just think overall Cleveland is going to be downgraded dramatically. So Cooper was one of those guys that you had mentioned there on your list. One of the other guys you asked about was Pickens.
And, we already talked a little bit about him.
The thing with Pickens moving forward is who's the OC. In Cleveland, the head coach is the OC. In Pittsburgh, it's not. So it's going to be who's calling the plays next year. Quite frankly, it might even be who's under center next year in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I think
because that's the wild card. So the whole Steelers offense is just on alert. We'll keep updates with them. Who else was on your list that you asked me about directions up or down?
Evans, Ayuk, and DK.
All right, so let's do Ayuk because I think he's the easiest of that group. Ayuk is going up, 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 and he should be a top 4 round pick next year. I don't think he's going to be able to penetrate into the neighborhood of the top 2. I'm certainly not going to take Ayuk above Amah, but the way San Francisco has done their offense is it is the bringing back essentially what the Packers did. Go vertical, push the ball downfield. It's a lot easier to run. And when they say in San Francisco, it's the run that opens the pass, it's kind of a chicken or egg thing because they do it so well in both departments. There is no way to cheat on the Niners offense. Ayuk is the reason why. Ayuk has clearly cemented himself as the more important receiver than Deebo, and Kittle has faded. And Kittle didn't fade this year because he missed 7 games. Kittle faded because Ayuk took it. And Ayuk was a first-round pick. Most people don't remember that or give him credit for it. The guy is talented. He's incredibly good going down the field. And guess what? Brock Purdy has a chance of breaking the record for furthest attempts downfield. So I love that about the Niners offense. Ayuk, of all the downfield receivers, is my favorite.
And Joe,
you asked me about the second favorite that we can get into a minute.
I wanna bring up. You just mentioned George Kittle, and I don't want to talk about tight ends too much at this point in time.
Mm-hmm.
But the statement that you made about George Kittle is somewhat true in terms of the scope of the 49ers. But it's not the full picture here. Yes, George Kittle finally played 16 games.
Mm-hmm.
He did get 65 receptions this year on 90 targets. Ayuk only had
Ayuk does more with the ball is my point.
I'm not arguing that. I'm definitely not arguing that. But what I'm saying is that Ayuk only had 11 more targets. So I wouldn't say that Kittle is being phased out.
No. I'm not trying to say that at all.
But to the point that you're making here, is that Ayuk's yardage totals are higher than Kittle's. Kittle had 1,020 yards, and Ayuk had 1,300 yards, and the touchdowns are about the same. Whereas Kittle gets his in bunches, Ayuk gets his kind of few and far between. There was a game I remember being an Ayuk owner where he only got like 40 yards on 2 receptions. So there are games where he is completely zoned out. But the thing I want to bring up here is when it comes to teams with multiple threats, and I'll bring up a couple other teams like that are worth talking about. The Niners can beat you in a lot of different ways. Mm-hmm. They can beat you with defense. They could beat you with the tight end. They could beat you with offense, or they could beat you with the running back. They could beat you with the wide receiver on the outside. They could beat you with a wide receiver screen. They could beat you with the wide receiver at running back. They can do that because their players are talented and they're coached really well, and the system works. One of the guys we were down on as the year went in was Debo, and we said to ourselves, if Debo is able to do the things that he did 2 years ago, then he would be fine. And this year, he did do exactly the things that he did 2 years ago. He got around 800 yards receiving, 7 touchdowns, 500 yards rushing, 5 touchdowns. And those tended to come in bunches when they realized that teams couldn't stop Debo. And he's a guy that with Ayuk are going to continue to be drafted in that 3rd, 4th, 5th round because of their versatility. And Debo may even be taken in the 2nd round because of the high versatility that he has. We were unsure if Brock Purdy was going to be able to put together a good season again, but he did. So he
did. I don't think we need to be worried about it anymore.
That this is going to happen again. Another team to look out for here. And I bring it up because it's really important to think about because they're really young. And it's a core that could stay together for a decent period of time, is Houston. Houston here has Noah Brown, who topped the average at 17 for the crew. 2 touchdowns, 567 yards, 33. Nico Collins at 15 yards per reception topped out the yards because he played in 14 games.
That's right.
And he played for 71 receptions, 1,100 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Dell played in 11, 709 yards, 7 touchdowns. And then, you'd have to scroll a little bit further down the rankings to find anybody else. So my question to you, building off of that, included with that, are teams like Minnesota, where we had the emergence of Jordan Addison this year with TJ Hawkinson and Justin Jefferson. And, when we think of, and Green Bay. Green Bay has
let me go through those orders. Let me first start with Houston.
Hold on, let me finish. Hold on.
Okay.
We have a team like Green Bay where we have Dobbs, Wicks, Watson, Reed, all hovering in that same. They all get practically the same amount of playing time. They're all hovering around 600, 700 yards in the range of 4 to 8 touchdowns. How do you value this work that these teams are putting into these wide receivers? And out of that group of players outside of Nico Collins, are there anybody else in that group of players that we mentioned on those teams that you feel has the opportunity to ascend to that 4th, 5th, maybe even 3rd round level?
Well, answer your question. I do believe Collins will produce as a third round level, but I don't think he'll be taken there. I think that Collins being nicked up is going to end up holding him back to the fourth or the fifth. But I do believe he will be a value wherever you get him.
Joe, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. Can you fix our banner?
What's wrong with the banner?
It's like too big. It's too big.
How so?
Well, the words are coming off. There we go. There we go. Much better.
Okay, there we go. Anyway, so when we look at Houston, Collins in particular, I believe he's going to be undervalued. The thing I love about Houston moving forward is twofold. First, they have three guys that are clearly defined for different responsibilities, and they equally distribute across them, meaning that they're able to be a multifaceted passing attack that doesn't need to just be one version, all short, like most of the league is, and they can expand it around.
Mm-hmm.
As you brought up there, that they're yak guys, but they also have good A dots. And I believe that the Houston offense overall,
and 2 total fumbles amongst that wide receiver.
Yeah, they don't really turn the ball around. I believe that Houston's offense overall has shown that when all three of them play, it's very, very good offense. And there is no reason not to expect a giant jump from rookie year to second year in the quarterback, which is concerning if you're in that division. So in terms of the Houston, I'm on board for all of them. I actually suspect all of them will end up overproducing their final draft spot when it's said and done.
Mm-hmm.
The second team you directed me to here was Minnesota. Minnesota is 100% contingent on does Cousins come back? And what condition is Cousins coming back into? With an Achilles injury, that could be devastating to your arm power, which can really affect the way that they use their guys. I mean, Addison and JJ are downfield targets. And
so you're talking like stepping up into a throw.
Yeah, exactly. Putting power into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I am really I'm probably not touching either of them next year for that reason of how down the field they are. I think Hawk is going to be the one who benefits from the more of the check down
if
game.
He comes back healthy.
That's the giant thing with Minnesota. If you look at it and say Cousins is 100%, Minnesota's all on the radar on the level. But if Cousins is hobbling, or if it's not Cousins, quite frankly, I'm probably not going to be targeting the Minnesota guys at all. Maybe not to the degree that we banished, like we did with the Tampa guys, where we just said there's no way ever Baker will make good receivers out of anyone because he's never done it before.
And we had
we
had also played around with the idea of Kyle Trask as well. So that was
which is scary. I mean, there's no way around that. So you look at Baker. Baker can put them in the playoffs on Sunday. It's weird. So
it's something we said could happen, though.
Yeah, the division was just imploded.
The division.
So I'm not super in love with Minnesota, which gives me to the next one of the Packers here. Love has certainly stepped up and progressed as the year went on. Mm-hmm. He had an initial shock. He figured out how the league punched him, and he punched back. Mm-hmm. That is good for the Packers overall. The problem for the fantasy community is when we enter next year, the assumption is Watson's not going to have a bad hammy, but he has every year. The guy in his entire career, counting college, has never caught 70 balls. So when you go into this, you rank their talent. Watson is either going to be their most talented or second most talented behind Reed. And do you want to bank on Watson? Now, obviously, if you're playing the system, I would go with Reed as the number 2 and the one I would probably target. But none of the Packers am I going to be interested in before the 7th round in terms of their receiving core, mostly because there's not a defined winner. That being said, if you are a type of player who already has filled in your receiving core and you're willing to punt on positions like quarterback or tight end, Green Bay is where you go shopping for lottery picks because any of the 4 of them could be elite. Also, they could all be balanced and mid like they are now. So
speaking of that,
it would all depend on my roster construction as far as my interest in the Packers.
So speaking of mid to terrible, Two guys that we really like the potential of this year going into the season because of what we saw at the end of last year. But that situation has changed. Those situations have changed drastically. Are Atlanta and Denver. Denver wasn't, outside of the game where they got trounced by Miami, they weren't overall an awful team. They weren't as anemic as they were the previous year. But again,
that's true. But how could you not have been?
But again, this is a team now whose wide receivers in totality only got 3,200 yards. And when we look at that in the grand scheme of things, where that ranks, it's definitely not high.
No,
it's definitely one of the lower totals in the league. So I bring this up because guys like Jerry Jeudy and guys like
well, Judy's not going to be there next year.
Guys like Jerry Jeudy and guys like Drake London were two guys that at least I liked going into the season because they had decent rapport. They were looking good at the end of last season. We know that Drake London's kind of locked into that situation. And unless a quarterback's there, that situation is not going to get better. And Jerry Jeudy is probably moving on. Depending on landing spots for those players, how far of a slide do you see in terms of their value? Are we looking at those guys like that being, guys we're staying away from, or are they going to be on that tail end of your thinking in your periphery and saying, because Cortland Sutton had the highest total yards on that team last year or this year, 770 yards, 10 touchdowns. He was buoyed by the touchdowns for sure. But we know Jarrett Wilson isn't going to be there Russell Wilson isn't going to be there next year. I said Jarrett Wilson because I was combining Jarrett Stidham and Russell Wilson. So guys like that, where do we see them? Because those were guys that were on the rise, potential league-winning picks in the 5th, 6th, 7th round there. And, and you can even add in Chris Godwin to that group too, because Chris Godwin's sitting there at almost 1,000 yards, but only 2 touchdowns.
Well, Godwin will be a different category, and I'll get into why here. Both Denver and Atlanta are not going to have the same quarterback next year as they had this year. So I do believe Baker's staying in Tampa. So Godwin will be a little bit different chat. So here is the answer for both of those rosters. If it is a rookie quarterback, I want to avoid the team in terms of their receiving yards. I believe that of the two of them, Denver is much more likely to bring in a veteran to take the job than Atlanta. So if Denver does bring
and we'll add in Terry McLaurin to that group too, Joe.
Yeah, fair enough with Scary Terry. So because they're definitely having another quarterback as well. So with the ones having rookies stepping into place, basically being between Scary Terry and London, I prefer what London brings to the table, mostly because he runs more quarterback-friendly routes than Scary Terry does. Scary Terry essentially needs a veteran downfield quarterback to truly be successful. And you're not going to get that out of a rookie, at least in his rookie year. So that is immediately concerning for them. It all depends on what direction they go. The reason I believe Denver is going to go a veteran is because of Sean Payton. I don't think Payton's going to develop someone from scratch. And I think they're going to want to bring in someone who at least is a proven NFL commodity. Maybe not super experienced. So I'm talking definitely a tier better than Wilson, just because you've been in the league a couple years. But maybe not have had a ton of starting experience. Probably what I'm talking about here is one of these starters that came in through injury over the course of the year that's going to be shifting to become a starting quarterback somewhere else. So current players on that list are people like Browning in Cincinnati, possibly, depending on how tomorrow goes, Mason in Pittsburgh. People who had successful runs as a backup, I see Denver having one of them. Which one? Not totally sure. But I see one of them being the starter in Denver. And if you put a big armed Browning or Mason in Denver, well, now not only am I excited about Sutton, I'm also excited about Mims because Mims it was the first ever draft pick by Peyton. The guy is super electric. In Peyton's head, he is the second coming of Tyreek Hill. They just need to have an offensive line to do it. This is the other reason I think that Denver is going to go predominantly veteran quarterback because they need to use their draft capital, even though they've limited amount, on the offensive line. And they tried buying an offensive line last year. It clearly didn't work. So when you look at this, they were all shorter contracts they essentially can escape out of. I do think that the Broncos are going to go the mature route at quarterback, rebuild an offensive line, and just hope that the defense, when they're not completely exposed all the time, can come back. I think that that's going to be what you look at there. Washington is trying to build a sandcastle that's underwater. They really
never successful
options. It's Scary Terry's in a horrible situation. I'm not even totally sure where you would want to. Obviously, you need a quarterback. They need a line. They need a defense. The best part of Washington right now is their running backs, in my opinion. And that's mostly because of the coach wants to run the ball.
Now let's kind of there's a lot of other wide receivers that I want to talk about, but I don't want to dominate the conversation.
Dude, you said Metcalf before. Can I jump on him?
Who?
You said Metcalf before. I never got to.
In a minute, because I want to include him in this quarterback conversation a little bit here. So Russell Wilson.
Yeah.
He had 26 touchdowns this year, but he's in the bottom half of the league with QBR, ranked 21st. He's in the bottom half of the league in terms of completion percentage, and he's in the mid to bottom in terms of yards. And so he's in that grouping, that QBR grouping of players that we're sitting here talking about: Justin Fields, Sam Howell, Kenny Pickett, Desmond Ridder, Aiden O'Connell, Mac Jones, Will Levis, Bryce Young, Zach Wilson. Those are all the people below him.
Yeah, that's not an awesome group.
In terms of QBR.
No, in QBR, it was the invented Tim Tebow stat that I don't give a ton of credit to.
Immediately above him, we have Dobbs, who we know isn't going to be a starting quarterback next year, Burrow, Carr, CJ Stroud, Mayfield, and Goff. Geno Smith is a quarterback sitting at 12th in terms of QBR, who only threw for 18 touchdowns this year. Because he only played in 14 games. He has, let me look it up here. In terms of completions, he's sitting at 14 in terms of the league. This is a quarterback now that last year we walked into the end of last season saying teams have figured out Geno Smith. We've come into this season and the Seahawks just didn't look good at times. But we have a quarterback here with a young stud wide receiver in DK Metcalf, with another young wide receiver that looks to be a stud in Jackson Smith-Njigba, and an aging guy that's afraid to get hit in Tyler Lockett. We also have a running game that also tends to get hurt a lot. When we look at the Seattle roster here and we talk about guys like DK Metcalf and Jackson Smith, how long until we say Seattle's got to get another quarterback, or are they going to be okay with Geno, knowing that Geno is also sitting in that 16 range again in terms of yards? What is it looking like in terms of Seattle wide receiver outputs and even Geno Smith's output for next year?
Well, about Seattle overall, I'm going to quote the great Mark Cuban on this one. They're riding the treadmill of mediocrity, and the only way to get off it is to burn the whole house down. And they're never going to do that as long as Pete Carroll's there. So essentially, they're not going to have a good enough draft pick. They had the chance 2 years ago when they had the 5th overall. They're not going to have a good enough draft pick to replace Geno. And there is no free agent that's going to be, except for maybe Cousins, that's clearly infinitely better than Geno. Geno's track record here is the reason I believe Love will drastically surpass him. When the league punched back at Geno, he never recovered. And he basically has been the same mid dude since week 9 of last year. That's what he is. He'll beat teams that are worse than him. He will not beat teams that are better than him. Love responded and then got his win back, just like Jacksonville did 2 years ago.
Love responded really good, Joe, and
that's what I mean. That's why I think he's going to be better than Gio.
That's a guy you said at the end of when we came up with all of our rankings. And granted, a lot of injuries this year. A lot of our rankings at the beginning of the season were out of this world in terms of end of year kind of stats. But the things that we said about Jordan Love were things that after that Bears game where he didn't look very good, week 4 or 5, somewhere in there.
Yeah, that's right.
He put himself together, and he sits now only 2 touchdowns away from Dak, who I believe is playing. Purdy's sitting, and I believe is Love playing probably. He's sitting in terms of
Love
yardage.
Is playing.
He's sitting at 10th in yardage and completion percentage, which the stat is what it is. He's sitting all the way at 23 in the league. So those stats speak a lot to his wide receiving core, speak a lot to him, speak a lot to his coaches.
Yeah, but they also speak a lot to not being able to recover, which is the problem in Seattle. It takes a tremendous amount of ability to overcome that, and they're not going to, like I said, they're not going to burn the thing down. They're giving the write-off of Geno this year and the fact that his entire offensive line has been eviscerated by injuries. They just have it. I think they've had something like 15 different combinations of offensive linemen throughout the course of the season. So that's not good. They're playing a lot of shuffling, a lot of moving things around. And yeah, you can give a certain degree of a write-off for that. But sticking within the realm of the fantasy conversation,
31
in
sacks.
terms of percentage of passes thrown, DK Metcalf broke the record in terms of throwing the ball to him on times that the quarterback drops back. How often does it go to a single guy? Metcalf broke that record. And you mentioned before all the top 10 guys, Metcalf ain't in that group. His target share almost by default is going to diminish next year. And I believe Metcalf is going to be, as a result of that fact, one of the more overrated players going in drafts next year, probably having him slated as a 3rd rounder. So I don't think he's going to give you that kind of production. On the other hand, Njigba was my 2nd rated receiver entering the draft. I had him behind Quentin Johnson. I think it might have switched. San Diego's not doing what there should be with Johnson, but that's a different problem. In terms of the Njigba, the dude is incredibly talented. He is night and day better than Zay Flowers. It's not even close. And when you look at what it is that he's bringing to the table, he's replacing Lockett in a great, great fashion. He is their slot machine that has the capability of doing anything else. He's one of these few guys that truly can win in a phone booth like the old school Antonio Brown. The guy has incredibly quick feet. He has great hands. I do believe Njigba will be the future in Seattle. And because he had such a lower target share this year than he will next year, I think he's going to be dramatically underrated and certainly someone that I am going to want to target moving in. Again, in general, I do like 2nd-year players, especially with the stability. They're going to keep Geno. They're going to keep Carroll. So Njigba is certainly someone that I believe you're going to be able to get a steal next year because in comparison, both Rishi Rice and probably Addison and definitely Flowers will all be drafted before him from this year's rookie class. And I think there's a chance that he'll be right there with Rice in terms of the best producing 2nd-year receivers next year.
So if you just joined,
and obviously Puka. Sorry, I blanked on
Puka. We're talking about the season that was in terms of stats and just looking ahead and talking a little bit about who we see as being a stable choice for next year, who we see as maybe playing above, their positional value in terms of next year. This is a way look ahead, but we're also looking back. So we're now we were just talking a little bit about the situation in Seattle in terms of quarterbacks.
Here, but I want to throw one at you that I want you to break down here. How do you about Kupp? Because Puka has clearly established himself as a presence, and Kupp, your first round guy this year, coming off the injury. Do you just assume he should be right there in that second, third round category? Or do you think that he's going to be reducing like this was the end?
So I don't think it's the end. But it's concerning. It's concerning in a couple ways, but not really, because we know that Kupp is uber talented in terms of his abilities prior to this injury.
Mhm.
And with this injury happening, we did see a drop off on the field, but there could be a bunch of things that we don't know behind that scene. Number one, it could be that maybe he's not fully 100% healthy yet.
I think that's
And
fair.
it could be that because there is other talent on the field, particularly Kyren Williams, who came out of the woodwork, and Puka, that he didn't have to be used as much. And so is he a first rounder anymore? No, absolutely not. I don't think he's a first rounder. But will he get into that second or third round in terms of just name recognition and what he did this year? 59 catches on 95 targets. So he still targeted a bunch, but Puka was targeted 154 times, which is absurd. That's an absurd amount of targets for a rookie. And I think that kind of comes back down to earth. Remember that these Rams wide receivers, they're catching the ball, but they're not getting the touchdowns that a couple other players were getting. Kyren here rushed.
It's stealing them like crazy.
So there's a nice distribution of touchdowns for these Rams wide receivers. Demarcus Robinson 4, Kyren again with 3, Tutu with 3, Higbee with 2, Kupp and Puka with 5 apiece. And that's with Kupp missing that action. 4 games. He's out for 4 games. And it was a significant injury coming off of another significant injury. So have these injuries affected him? Absolutely. There's a reason to believe that has happened. Now, if you believe in Cooper Kupp and you believe that there's a return, that these numbers will stabilize or normalize a little bit, just to know, 59 receptions, as we said, George Pickens overperformed on his 63 receptions. Mike Evans, Brandon Ayuk overperformed also on their amount of receptions. Is Kupp going to be back to 1,000 yards? I think absolutely Kupp is going to be back to 1,000 yards next year. Is Kupp going to return to that 13 touchdown threshold that we saw a couple years back? I don't think so. I don't think that's going to happen. I think he stabilizes probably somewhere around that 1,000 to 1,400 yard range with about 7 touchdowns, which purely puts you on that back end of in that range where we were drafting Amon-Ra and CeeDee Lamb this year, in that back half of the first round, beginning of the second round. I don't think he skates any further down than that. I do think that.
Yeah, I do. I think his name recognition is great, but I think you're going to have this entire debate all off season: Puka or Kupp. Who should you take? I think Puka's going to be accelerated up too high.
I think the debate that's going to happen is the same debate that we saw with Puka, or that we saw with Higgins and Jamar Chase. This is the same debate.
And look at it, the one who was deemed second fell.
They did fall, but Higgins' name doesn't carry as much weight as Cooper Kupp. So I bring this up for a couple reasons. If we just go and we look ahead here and we say, okay, first round, second round candidates going into next year, situationships aside, just going off of what happened this year. And I'm just going to kind of try to put players in. We need let's do a 10-man league. Okay. So we need 20 guys, right? McCaffrey, Kyren. Those seem to be bona fide first round picks right there. Absolutely 100%, right? Right.
Yeah.
ETN is going to be low first round, high second round. 100%. That's not going to be a debate.
I still think that's overrated, but yeah.
Bijan is probably going to drop to the end, to the mid or high second, mid first, somewhere in there. He's probably going to fall there. You can't take that away.
We'll dive into the running backs later, man.
Yeah. Well, listing guys that I think are going to be in the first and second round of next year.
I just don't think that
So-
Cooper's name recognition is going to keep him in the top 20 overall. I don't think he's going to be the
Hold
fifth
on.
receiver. I mean,
Okay.
just go through receivers.
No,
Tyreek's
I
going
don't
before him. Chase
Joe,
is
I
going
don't-
before him. Lamb's
I
going
don't
before him.
think I don't think he is either. But when we look at guys that are first or second round talent going into next year, and this is not withstanding anybody who like comes out of the woodwork, you're going to see CD, Tyreek, Amon-Ra, Jamar Chase, and Justin Jefferson all going in that first round. Okay,
Mhm.
all of them are going to go there.
All of them are going before Cup.
Then you have, I agree with that 100%. Then you have Puka, who's going to go before Cup 2, Diggs, and Adams, who are all in that range. And I want to bring this up because Garrett Wilson is that candidate that was this year where we had high volatility the year before, but a really good amount of usage and receptions and targets, who people were drafting mid-second, early second, who also got 1,000 yards, just got 1,000, and only got 3 touchdowns this year. Chris Olave is another guy that we talked up a lot, had a good amount of volume this year. He had 135 targets on 85 receptions, didn't get the yardage totals that we wanted, and didn't get the touchdowns. And we talked about that. We talked about that was a thing that could happen.
New Orleans is disappointing.
You have guys, and then you have these candidates here. So I just mentioned maybe at most 12 guys. At most, I mentioned 12 guys there. And outside of maybe throwing in there Devonta Smith, maybe throwing in
AJ Brown, you didn't say.
Maybe throwing in there Sam Laporta. AJ Brown was on that list. I just forgot to mention him. Maybe throwing in Sam Laporta. You're not drafting. I mean, I won't.
Oh no, Cooper Kupp's certainly not on my avoid list. But I'm saying that he's going. I would not. Put it this way: those who are going to take Puka before Kupp are going to be disappointed in their selection. I think that's what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you that. But even when you look at all of the, we talked about running backs this last year. And if you do you have the ability to write as I talk so that I can see something here so we can just
speak it into existence, baby.
Early look ahead sandwich, because it was a down year for running back totals.
It was a down year for all totals.
Definitely a down year for running back totals. So when we get to the running backs, we'll talk about who has the potential to continue to ascend. Who are we looking at in first round, second round kind of value here? I think in the second round next year, people have learned their lesson on drafting quarterbacks early.
Hopefully. Although Josh Allen was the 60%. If you had him on your team, you were in the playoffs.
Yeah, Josh Allen was at 33%, and Jalen Hurts was at 35%. But again, those quarterbacks.
That's for the championship.
Yeah, in the championship. But those guys were drafted, third, fourth round, back and second. So I got Allen in the fourth round. So my draft I took Barkley at 7. Right after Tyreek Hill went, I took Barkley at 7. Coming back around, I was lucky enough to get AJ Brown, who fell. If I wasn't lucky enough, I would have drafted CD, and then AJ Brown in the third, and then Josh Allen in the fourth. That's how my draft went. I had a chance to get Gibbs before I took Devonta Smith, but I couldn't pass. So
and I got it. Well, you won your league. It all worked out.
We did win. So. Looking at candidates going into next year, you're probably only going to see, Patrick Mahomes, it feels like he has had a pretty pedestrian season because he has. Again, no quarterback threw for 40 touchdowns this year, so there's no statistical anomaly there. But you had Dak, who was drafted late, Matt Stafford, who was drafted real late, Baker, who was drafted real late, CJ Stroud coming out of the woodwork, and Jalen Hurts was buoyed by a lot of rushing touchdowns, but had a lot of turnovers this year as well. So you're looking at things and you're saying to yourself, well, quarterbacks aren't going to be as as taken as early. You're not going to have that Kelsey dilemma in that first round. You're still probably going to take him somewhere in that second to third round range, but he's been replaced by Sam Laporta. So the long and short of it is that there's no reason not to draft Kupp, because Kupp has that upward potential where, just like this year, just like most people drafted him this year, once that injury happened, you were taking him in the second round if he fell to you, because the value of him being there is one thing. But the other thing that I'd like to talk about with that, Joe, and obviously you probably can't pull up the thing because I don't see it, is roster spots wasted on players that we are hoping to be better that you can't really take out of your lineup. And one of those players that was much maligned this year, despite what the statistics say, was Davante Adams. Davante Adams was drafted at the back half of the first, beginning of the second, and he was a player that, outside of putting Tank Dell or Puka in your lineup,
you couldn't bench.
You couldn't bench him unless you had 2 or 3 other good options, and some people did. Some people were able to snag Addison late. Some people were able to add Dell. But even then, your decision was, do I miss out on a 40-point game by Davante Adams, or do I sit through and suck it up and sit through and try to go through those 6-point, 2-point, 4-point games that he was throwing out there? And that was all quarterback, but I don't really see that Vegas quarterback situation in general getting better. Granted, Jacoby
Myers, drafting one. I mean, the 100% you're going to get a rookie out there, but we saw essentially what rookie level talent does. But Garrett Wilson this year effectively had rookie level talent throwing him the ball.
So as I look at it, Joe, and like it got real nasty for Davante Adams. The Giants game, 34 yards. The Detroit game, 11 yards. New England, 29 yards. 45 yards against Green Bay. These were all like smash spots. And he only had 3 games over 100 yards, and the one he was almost at 200. So Davante Adams is still going to be in that top 2 rounds as well with Cooper Kupp. And
I would take Kupp over Adams at this point.
And so you could potentially, and I mean, it's crazy to think about it, because the value is going to, like, again, and I'm going to bring up a couple other guys that, you drafted.
So essentially what you're describing here is Adams performed as a 7th round player, but because people took him in the 5th or the 2nd, that you had to play him.
Yeah.
And that's obviously what you need to avoid here. And when we look at next year, is that going to change? Not as long as he's wearing silver and black. I guess that's the end. He's already said he wants out.
What will change?
You put him on a different roster, we got a different conversation.
What will change, though,
Joe? Players in the league.
And what will
imagine
change,
him in Buffalo. Imagine Davante Adams in Buffalo.
What will change, though, speaking of Buffalo, speaking of another disappointing player there in Diggs overall, I just want to go to our league for a moment. It was a league, that you and I both did not win our league. Our friend won it. It was very competitive all the way down to the end.
It was.
Just pulling up wide receivers. This is an auction league, so again, there's a lot of potential we have here. At the end of the fantasy season,
which is the standard PPR scoring.
Which is the standard PPR scoring. This is the top 10, and it's similar to what we were saying throughout the whole show here. CeeDee Lamb, 367. Tyreek Hill, 360. Ahmad, 308. AJ Brown, 290. Puka, 285. DJ Moore, 281. Mike Evans, 278. Keenan Allen, 277. Stephon Diggs, 261. Jamar Chase, 259. And then there you go with Davante Adams, 251. Pittman, 244. Brandon Ayuk and Debo at 244 and 238. You got your boy Davante, Nico. Then all the way down here at around 200 is Chris Olave, Rishi Rice, DK Metcalf. So what the reason I'm saying this, and Jaden Reed was
And Adams is more talented than most of those names. That's why he needs out of Oakland.
I want to bring up that Jacoby Myers is sitting at 198. So the difference between Jacoby Myers at 198 and Devonta Adams at 251 is only about 60 points, but that makes a world of difference. So is Devonta Adams still producing like a second round wide receiver? Yeah, he is. Joe, he is. Though, but the problem is with this, Joe. I mean, he's still top 12. But the problem with this is that
it's all condensed into 3 weeks.
Exactly. That is the issue. And that is an issue that Mike Evans didn't have. Mike Evans pretty much got it throughout the year. Puka pretty much got it throughout the year. Amon, AJ Brown pretty much got it throughout the year. So while he's still producing at a decent clip for fantasy purposes, that clip was not good. Week 5, week 6, week 8, week 9, and week 16, all under 10 points. Week 3, week 11, and week 15, and week 17, all over 20 points. And week 2, over 20 points, the rest mid. So is he going to be fine? I think absolutely he's going to be fine if they find a quarterback. And I think Jacoby Myers will be fine. And I think this team in general, in terms of the Raiders, will be okay going into next year if they keep this head coach that they have right now, who fires them up, gives them a reason to play. If they keep him and they find a quarterback that can actually get these players. Well, I think Devonta Adams going into next year is going to probably be the most slept on first or second rounder because of what he was used to performing. Like we said, there was a potential for Devonta Adams to get the 13 touchdowns, but it didn't happen. But he's still, we have to remember that first and second round wide receivers, it is perfectly acceptable for them to get 7 or 8 touchdowns. The yardage total and that points per reception total is what we want to see increase. And Devonta Adams only catching 98 balls on 167 targets is not good. That was not good here. Is that you take that up to 112 or 110 or 100 or even like 150.
20 catches is 200 yards for him. Yeah.
He's more than solid. So as I look at it, the wide receiver that probably starts to fall down on people's lists that people are too high on, and I was high on this year, is probably Diggs. The situation in Buffalo, outside, because there was no weather anomaly this year in the NFL outside of maybe like one or two rain games. You look at the production of a guy like Diggs, and you're having the same conversation to yourself that we just had with Devonta Adams, wherein, you're looking and you're saying to yourself, I don't know if I can trust him. I don't know if his team, because they found James Cook's new direction, because Josh Allen, because the coordinator changes, all of this, it seems like Diggs is going to be a guy that you could probably get, as many people got him this year, back end first, beginning of second, and you can't take him out of your lineup. There are going to be weeks where he overperforms, and there are going to be weeks where he is just 12 points, 13 points in PPR, which isn't awful, but it's not what you want out of your number 1 or number 2 drafted wide receiver. And that's, like I said, that's the issue with Devonta Adams. That's the issue with Diggs. And that issue is just underperforming as a top tier player. Now in our league, it didn't much matter because it was auction and you could go after whoever you wanted to go after here.
Which is the joy of auction leagues.
Which is the joy of auction leagues. And, my team in our league did score one of the higher totals of points didn't make it very far. But just bringing that up is that there are only 3 wide receivers in the league that averaged over 20 points in fantasy. You go back down to Diggs here. Diggs is at 16. Devonta Adams is at 15. Jamar Chase is going to be back. Joe Burrow is going to be back. Jamar Chase is still going to be drafted in the top 5, top 6 of players.
Should be.
Maybe even top 3 eventually. I could see a situation here, Joe, that looking ahead to the next year's fantasy draft, that your first round looks almost exactly like this, where you're taking Christian McCaffrey 1, CeeDee Lamb 2, Tyreek Hill 3, Jamar Chase 4. You might slip another running back somewhere in there. But if you don't, after Jamar Chase, you're getting Amon-Ra at 6. And next year, there's going to be no value, 0 value at taking another wide receiver in that situation.
Oh, yeah.
In that round. So a guy like Kupp is going to be overdrafted for what we think his projection could be. A guy like Adams, while I said underrated, he's going to be overdrafted because he produced the same level as Pittman, which was a guy that was drafted whose situation is going to change next year, but a guy that was drafted in the 4th, 5th, 6th rounds of drafts. So Nico Collins, another guy that ascended far, he might skate his way into the 3rd round based upon people looking at all those wide receivers they couldn't take. And now they're going to overtake some guys. Some are going to be better than others. But as I see it here, Joe, like even if we go to running backs here, let's just flip this script a little bit and talk a little bit about running backs, because I want to get to the highest fantasy points for running backs here. Christian McCaffrey, obviously, numero uno, 392. We knew that was going to happen.
As long as he stayed healthy, he was going to win.
It was one of the things that everybody, enjoyed. Then you got Travis Etienne sitting at 271. He was a guy that we didn't really like.
He fell off, though, hard in the second half of the year.
He was a guy we didn't really like going into the season because we weren't sure how his PPR usage would be. He got that up, and that was a big boon for him, averaging 17 points per game. Raheem Mostert, one of the things we said about Miami, I did say, early in that offseason that I thought Miami was going to be a bottom-tier team if Tua didn't play. I still believe that. I still believe that if Tua wasn't there, they would have been a bottom-tier team. I also thought that if they didn't find a running game, they would also be a bottom-tier team. Well, they found a running game.
Yes,
and
they did.
That worked out really well for Raheem Mostert. But Raheem Mostert probably not going to be the starter there next year, and it's probably going to be Devin Achane. Then you got Brees sitting at 264, buoyed by that 60-point game that he had somewhere along the line. Kyren Williams sitting at 254, who was like a rock, who would have gotten more had he not gotten hurt.
Sure.
Rachaad White, who was buoyed by his reception totals as well, because he did not reach 1,000 yards rushing, and he did not get more than 3 receiving touchdowns. So he was buoyed by that PPR total too. So be wary of him because that could definitely slide.
Yeah, Rachaad White, I don't think will maintain.
Joey Mixon, our boy Joe Mixon, who we dislike a lot.
Dude, this guy's done.
But he was the 7th, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
I understand what he did this year, but
hold on. Going further,
I'm not totally sure I'm sold on Kareem for next year.
Alvin Kamara is right after Joey Mixon at 232 in PPR. Then you've got Jahmyr Gibbs, who's on the ascension.
Gibbs is ascending.
Derrick Henry, who's on a downfall. James Cook, who's seemingly on an ascension, but I wouldn't want to touch him that high. Bijan, who came out and, for lack of a better word, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 12th ranked running back. You drafted him at 7th overall. Not a good return on value there.
Nope.
Tony Pollard was a worse return on value.
Called it.
Pacheco was a good return on value because he was going really, really late.
Yes, he was.
Jerome Ford, really good return on value because Chubb got hurt, but Chubb's going to be back. Swift, another good return on value, at least at some point in that season, averaging 12 points a game. Then you got Saquon sitting there. He feels undraftable at this point in time.
He does.
Because if you look at it, Tommy DeVito played 8 games and he got sacked 36 times. So while Saquon missed a bunch of games, and
he didn't produce when he was in. After the injury, he never rebounded.
He still averaged. So after his injury coming back, he's
a free agent, isn't he?
I believe so. He only had
imagine him in Dallas.
He only had 2 games above 20 points and 4 games below 10 points. So, he was as average as it came and not returning any value. And then you got Kenneth Walker, Brian Robinson, Jaylen Warren, Gus Edwards, Josh Jacobs because of the injury, Devin Achane because of the injury. Like I said, those guys are going to go up.
Yeah, the point is the running back position did not really produce.
No,
if you snagged one early that did, and then went receiver hard, that was how a lot of people won leagues.
But this is what I'm going to say, though, is that you are going to have a harder time doing that this year because I think that
that's what they said last year too. That the running backs were not going to have a run, but running backs had a run by all data metrics coming in. People still took running backs early.
But what I'm going to say is that you're looking at you're looking at these high rated running backs, and if you go back and you look at our list, Joe, of the top 15 rated running backs,
they won that.
None of these guys. I mean, outside of maybe Christian McCaffrey, Etienne, Hall, Mixon, and like Gibbs and Bijan, these guys. I mean, it was a lot of a weird season this year, a lot of down years because all these quarterbacks.
I was big on Najee. You look at Najee, he's like 5th in runs over 20 yards, 5th in yards after contact, but he's nowhere near fantasy value.
He had a bad situation for a long time in that year in terms of,
Yeah, the Steelers were the 4th lowest scoring team in the league. And I guess that's really fundamentally the point here.
I forgot here, Joe.
Where's the Gus bus?
The Gus bus was purely in that he was right after Jaylen Warren. So it went Barkley, Walker, Robinson, Warren, Edwards. But another guy that's going to be in the 1st and 2nd round because of he's worth it is Jonathan Taylor. Taylor put together 128 points on the season. He only played in, let's look at it. He played in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 games.
Okay.
And I'm going to take out his first game.
This is why we're going to have to do the average, Bob, of points per game played. Because this is where people like Collins, JTT are really going to step up and be like, wow, we need to get them. And on that note, Chase might look like the most valuable of them all.
But you could see here, too, Joe, is the fact that
when you look at these players, I just have to plug in my iPad real quick. When you look at these players, I'd be there. You and this goes back to Kupp. There are players that had statistically bad years whose situations did change a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But they're gonna like a guy that I don't really want, like a couple guys, that were drafted pretty high. A fun fact, though, for everybody who watches this, Zeke was on my 2 championship teams in the past 4 years. So I like that. That's a weird little fun tidbit. But when we put Zach Moss's numbers together and we put in Jonathan Taylor's numbers together, that's a running back that's in the top 10. Now, Anthony Richards is going to take away carries from Jonathan Taylor. That is going to happen. But for lack of a better value player in the 1st or 2nd round, you're going to be looking that way early and often. And I know situations are going to change in the offseason, but like Austin Eckler is going to fall into that 2nd and 3rd round. And
I don't think he will, but he should.
You're going to be extremely tempted to take him because his situation did not really change this year. Yes, his wide receivers got hurt. Justin Herbert, blah, 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 blah.
Well, he didn't score.
About that. he missed 4 games, but even if you give him that 4 games, he still had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games under 10 points.
Yeah, I mean, this is why we're going to break it down per games played.
But 4 games above 20 points. So or 5 games above 20 points. So Austin Ekeler is a guy that you're seeing, okay, maybe he doesn't fall into that 3rd round. Maybe what you're seeing here, Joe, is you have Christian McCaffrey, then you have 5 wide receivers.
I'm seeing a 30-year-old running back I don't want in Austin
Right.
Ekeler.
You're going Christian McCaffrey, 5 wide receivers in a row, Travis Etienne, Breece Hall, then a couple more wide receivers, Jonathan Taylor, whoever the running back for Miami might be. In that frame, you're probably getting Kyron Williams and Jahmyr Gibbs somewhere in that 8 to 13 range. You're going to see Kyron and Jahmyr go 100%. You're going to see Bijan go somewhere in that 8 to 15 range. And that's where Austin Ekeler is probably going to go. And you're going to be like, oh, Austin Ekeler. Saquon Barkley is probably going to go with the back half of the 2nd round. And you're going to be sitting there and going to yourself, man, I got Christian McCaffrey and Saquon Barkley. I'm set for the season. Nah, that is not what we want. Unless there are major improvements to that line.
Which sure won't be.
Saquon. I mean, as a Saquon owner, Saquon is unownable. And then you got Josh Jacobs coming back, right? And Josh Jacobs, it's the same game we were playing with Josh Jacobs last year. Is injury? Is he going to play?
Well, there are a couple teams I'm going to want their running backs from, even though they don't have the numbers this year. Just to jump into this, Minnesota is going to be one of them. Green Bay and Tennessee. Mm-hmm. I'm going to want all of their backs. Because those 3 teams tend to define who is their guy.
And they're not going to go high. They're not going to go.
No, they're not going to go high. They're going to be guys that I want though. Spears is probably a 4th rounder right now. I want him. When we look at whoever Minnesota ends up making their starter, probably not in the league right now. I want him. Green Bay the same way. Maybe Dillon's officially the starter, but I'd be surprised if they don't bring in another one. So
yeah, but Joe, those Green Bay running backs,
no, I get it. But the reason I want those teams, again, is because I believe that we're going to see a jump in their offenses overall. You think about Tennessee this year, their offensive line was trash, and Will Levis was running for his life, but he had sparks. I think Tennessee's a team on the rise. I think they're going to run the ball because of it. Minnesota is already a team that shows that they have the ability of making things happen from a running back position. And you never said him, but Kenneth Walker is someone I'm going to like next year.
I said him. I said him, but
he's probably a 2nd rounder next year. And I think he's going to produce. What I'm looking at is, are they going to produce at that level?
Walker.
I don't trust Miami's backs producing like they did this year. Because when you look at both of them, or running backs as a team, however you want to do it, ton of love early. But Miami's offense has really skittered the 2nd half of this year. They're winning, sure, but they're not doing what they did. And I don't want to get players to win in September. I want players to win in November. And
I want players to win all the time.
If you get, again, when you're talking about players that are on the,
but I think Joe,
most players can't do that. Most are going to give you a stretch.
And I think what our show is really all about. It's getting you to the point where you're going to start the season out good, and then you're going to be able to make trades somewhere in the season. Just like it's one of those things that we brought up, and Jefferson was a big topic of conversation. Tony Pollard was a big topic of conversation this year. Travis Etienne is another big topic of conversation this year. If you went out there and you traded DJ Moore, and just as an example from what I did this year, if you went ahead and traded DJ Moore after his blow-up game and went out and got Travis Etienne, you probably were in the playoffs of your league. You don't have going into that beginning part of the season. You don't have to draft players that are going to be good all year, but you do have to find players that are going to be good enough for you to win that beginning stretch of the season that still retain the value and people see value in, that you can go in further. Like, for example, in my Yahoo League, I had a running back go down early to an injury, a Saquon.
Yeah, Saquon, yeah.
So I picked up Zach Moss, and Zach Moss carried me for 3 or 4 weeks until the news of JT coming back.
Sure.
Then nobody wanted Zach Moss, and I didn't really want him, but I kept him on my bench. And then he came back, got me a couple more weeks later on in the season, and that was good. So, but I couldn't trade him because he had lost.
Yeah, this is when the
value.
schedule analysis is going to come into play. That's what our offseason is going to be after the schedule gets released.
But
who's going to have those valleys and the peaks?
But I want to bring this up because I want to lay down my Yahoo League's draft results, and I want to just kind of. This is kind of the style of the league, but also what we could potentially see next year in terms of value of players, and not the same players, but the same positional value. So not the same exact names.
Yeah, so just read them as positions.
So wide receiver, running back. Running back, tight end. So obviously that tight end.
That ain't happening again.
That tight end is going to drop, and this is probably going to be running back, wide receiver. But anyway, 6 was wide receiver. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 were all running backs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. 12 was wide receiver. That was Cooper Kupp. Second round, wide receiver, running back, wide receiver, tight end, wide receiver, running back, running back. That logistically, that can happen. And then you had running back, wide receiver, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, running back. That's Kenneth Walker. Running back, wide receiver. That one was Jerry Jeudy. Running back, wide receiver. That one was Amari Cooper. That's the end of the third round. So,
all right. So on that note, obviously it's very running back or wide receiver heavy. So
I think it's about even.
Maybe it was even or the, but here's what I want to point out. There are 2 teams next year that I thoroughly believe their best running back is in college right now, and I just want to throw them at you, and you tell me what you think. The first is the Cincinnati Bengals. Their number 1 fantasy back next year will be drafted, and the second one, sorry about that, and the first one being the Cincinnati Bengals because they don't have one, and the second one being the New Orleans Saints. I know that New Orleans had that second-round pick last year who got hurt, but I firmly believe that both Mixon and that whole New Orleans saga is done.
So, just statistically for you, before we get to that conversation, there were in this draft, and it goes like this: in that first 3 rounds, I want to make sure I have all the players here.
2 tight ends was weird.
So that would be 36 picks because it's a 12-team league, right? 16 running backs, 17 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, and 1 quarterback. Now, before we get to your question, you look at the first 3 rounds in next year's draft, you could potentially see, because of the dearth in value from this year specifically, you could potentially
5 running backs switching to receivers.
You can see potentially 3 quarterbacks go, and that's Hurts, Allen, and Jackson, Lamar.
Yeah,
those 3. You have the tight ends shifting down to 1 with or 2 with Sam Laporta and Travis Kelce.
Kelce is going to fall the 3rd round.
We'll still have value there. You have 2 happening there because Mark Andrews isn't going to be there because Isaiah Likely looks to be.
Isaiah Likely might have taken his job. Period.
Real deal. But Mark Andrews is still good. So you look at that, which means that you're shifting now. So that's a little bit. So one of those positions is going to take a little bit of hurting. and it's most likely going to be the running back position. You're going to see the running back position probably fall. I believe the numbers work out to probably about 14 in the first 3 rounds. So 14 running backs, 17 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, and 3 quarterbacks. Does that add up correctly?
Yeah.
Do the quick math for me. Okay. So out of the players that we have talked about today, and this is just a really, if anybody's tuning in right now, this is a really good look ahead to next year. So, Joe, when you make any bookmarks, put this in as a bookmark here. This is just a really early look ahead at this draft. When we talk about the players that I mentioned earlier in the show, and we can go through a couple of those players because this is a fun game to play here. The players that we're looking at. So we go Lamar, right? We go Allen. We know Mahomes is going to drop unless he gets a wide receiver. If he gets a good wide receiver in the vein of like a Devontae
Adams
caliber wide receiver, you're going to see that quarterback drop go from 3 to 4. Because even with Hurts's struggles with turnovers, I don't think he drops out of the 3rd round in most leagues next year because the value at running back is very not like there. So let's just say we drop running backs down to 13 and quarterbacks up to 4, and that's Lamar, Allen, Hurts, and Mahomes. Now, people might be much maligned and say I'm not drafting a quarterback in the first 3 rounds because of what happened, but the value is there. Those quarterbacks outside of Mahomes carried most teams to a championship.
Oh, they did.
You look and say Hurts and Allen were on 35 and 33% fantasy championship teams, and Lamar was at 28. So the value for those 3 guys, and Brock Purdy was at 25. So an anomaly, but like, not so much. And Dak was on this list too at some point in time too. So
you look at it.
So
60% of the champion games had two of the first 3 quarterbacks taken.
Okay. So
there's value in that.
So we go into next year, we look at this and we say first 3 rounds. And I'm so disappointed we can't get can you get like a typing thing up at the same time so we can keep the list for
Bob, at this point, I don't know how to do that.
So we look at it. Hey, Recon, what's up? We're just talking early look ahead fantasy for next year. So welcome. Well, I'm the chip. Nice.
Love it.
Love to hear it, Recon. We're so
love you walking in and dominating, man.
We're so happy you're going into next year as a champion. Thanks for sticking with us.
She said your league was not cool.
Yeah. I mean, from what we heard, all of that coming out of that Alvin Kamara trade, we're so glad that you made it, Recon. We're really
love it. Love it.
So we're just going to run down who we think are going to be in this top 3 rounds next year. What Joe and I were just breaking down is that you have potentially in this first 3 rounds, 13 running backs, 17 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, and 4 quarterbacks, assuming Mahomes gets a wide receiver. So players that are going to be drafted in these rounds, and I'm just going to go players. I'm not going to go which round I think that they're going to go in. So
basically top 3 quality.
Yeah. Keep count for me here, Joe. Okay. All right. You're going to have CD, Tyreek. Oh, that was Siri. Siri talking to me now. CD, Tyreek, AJ Brown, Amon-Ra, Puka. That they let a rookie win it. Nice.
Love it.
See, I love that when that happens, Recon, is that, when you go in and people think oh, he's not going to be great. He's not going to be good. And then you come out winning the championship first year, it's so satisfying, isn't it? It's
also some pressure for next year.
It's extremely satisfying, but you're with us right now. So you're getting that early look ahead for next year so that you're ahead of the game. So I've listed 5 wide receivers already right there.
Yeah.
Tyreek, CD, AJ Brown, Amon-Ra, Puka. That's directly from the top yardage totals from this past year. And we don't see that changing or moving that much. Then you've got Jamar. And like I said, this is in no specific order. Okay. Then you have Jamar. Then you have Kupp. Okay. Then you have DK. Diggs, Adams,
Adams is 11.
okay? And then you are probably scooting in there. Did I say Nico?
Not yet. That's 12.
You got Nico. I said Devontae. You got Olave. Probably
Definitely
him.
have Olave. Olave is going to be one of the most slept on guys
You've got Waddle.
who also been slept on. You haven't said Higgins yet either.
Okay. Well, you're probably going to have Mike Evans. Okay?
Probably have Higgins. Are you giving me Higgins or not?
I didn't give you Higgins. Okay. Because I
All right,
didn't
you're
give you.
15
I didn't give
with
you
Waddle
Ayuk
and
yet.
Evans.
I didn't give you Ayuk yet. Okay.
All right, fair.
And I didn't give you Allen yet. But
Allen's 17.
But these guys, right? So you have all these wide receivers. That was
I
7.
still think Higgins belongs in that group.
Right, but
You don't have Mike Williams in there either.
But I'm just saying here, Joe, is that I can name you 20 deserving wide receivers for those first 3 rounds spots.
Oh yeah, easily.
Okay.
I'm not fighting that.
The best part is I beat the 4th, 2nd, and 1st seed being the 7th. The thing is that I beat all of it.
Oh, that is amazing.
Oh my god, dude, you'll be the
home field. But we're gonna hit on this. Home field advantage is a crock. I hate that concept. And it is not cool. But I'm glad that you did.
The feeling that you have from going through the gauntlet and coming out on top makes that win so much better.
Especially with a 10-point deficit before you even start.
Exactly. Like coming out and having the projections say you're not going to win and then just beating the snot out of the team, or coming out. I like even better that eking win. I hate it on the losing side, but I love it on the winning side when you just eke out a win and you're like, oh yeah, I picked the right guys this week. Like this week, Joe, in my starting lineup and recon for you too, I went with my tight end because Hawkinson got hurt. I went with Jawan Johnson. And then I heard that Hollywood Brown was put on injured reserve. So I'm like Dorching it up. Went Greg Dortch. I've never felt so satisfied in my entire life. Oh yeah. It was. Yeah, I mean, if he was healthy.
Well, you had the Amari week. I definitely remember that because I blew Bob's mind when I said put up Amari.
So
on that note, Bob, that's the why I lost in the playoffs. I played the guy who had Amari that week, and I believe that's also the week that Eckler went off. And he had 90 points across 2 guys. You just can't do anything about that.
Disgusting. That's
So
absolutely gross. So
lose to Cooper. Ugh.
So as I said, you have at that back half of that 3rd round, you have guys like DJ Moore, you have guys like Smith, you have guys, all of those guys are going to be drafted in that 3rd round, 4th round range. Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, probably.
Yeah, dude, I think you're easily getting 25 receivers.
You're
in
easily
the first 3 rounds.
So when I go to running backs now, right?
I see 7 I want. Maybe.
Dude, the smoke from David Njoku over the last. So recon, going back to it, the guy was playing. He beat me twice this year. Twice. Not by a bunch, but beat me twice. He had Njoku go off in that first game on Thursday, and I was like, it's over. I was like, I'm cooked. It's done. Then he had Kenneth Walker get hurt in that game. He had Kamara get hurt in that game, and I'm like, I have a chance. Smoke the first seed by 30 points. Love it. Absolutely love it,
man.
Yeah, you'll look back on that and continue to look back on it and just say, this was my best team. This was the best. And you want to keep winning. Like you absolutely 100% want to keep winning. So Joe, as we do this, and Recon too, you can give us your thoughts about running backs you like going into next year in the 1st or 2nd or 3rd round. But as I see it here, Joe.
Yeah, I only see 7 of them, dude. I know way more than will go, but I only see 7.
But if we take my league's averages here and we dip this number, and like I said, you can if you want to put 20 wide receivers and 10 running backs into this list here,
it's still 10 when there's not 10 deserving to be top 3 rounds.
You have McCaffrey, you have Kyron.
Yeah.
You have Travis Etienne, You have Bijan Robinson.
I'm not sure you do have Etienne and Bijan.
They're
You
going.
should, but I have
going.
Gibbs, I have Swift
I'm
for
saying
sure.
Gibbs and Swift. That takes me to 6.
Yeah.
Then you have people probably on the fence about, and then Kenneth Walker's probably going to go. That's
Walker's
7.
definitely on there.
Pacheco, is he going to go? Probably not that
Pacheco
high.
should go top 3.
But he probably will. Then you have one of, if not more, of the running back situation in Miami. Probably just one.
Yeah, A-Chain's going.
And then you're playing around with guys like Najee, Rashad White,
Barkley.
Oh, I forgot Brees Hall.
You got Hall. You forgot Hall. Hall's the
Forgot
obvious
Hall.
one in there.
Brees Hall's going to be up there. And Jonathan Taylor. So
Yeah.
I'm
But I don't
looking
think Bijan should be in it.
I'm looking at 12 running backs in the first
And
3
Swift
rounds.
is the other one who deserves it.
Yeah, I didn't say I said that he was in it.
Oh, you said Swift? Okay.
So even if we stick to my original number of 13 running backs and 17 wide receivers, with that number floating one way or the other with maybe 15 and 15, there are players that we feel this year didn't do well, but they're going to be drafted there anyway because of the potential, like I said,
Well, I can tell you already, Bob. I had the 5th pick.
Jacobs.
I'm almost certainly taking Jonathan Taylor with it.
I don't think it's a bad pick. I honestly don't. And Recon too. We were talking about this to just get thinking about next year and talking about players that are on the downswing and on the upswing. Guys like Tony Pollard down, right?
Yeah, out.
Mixon down.
Out.
Saquon down. Connor up maybe.
I don't know. Connor's a hard one.
Not 3rd round, but you can. I mean, guys that you're going to see in that running back dead zone. No, yeah, I mean, like, I'm with you, Recon. Like, I drafted Allen in the 4th round this year, and outside of Laporta, Kelsey, Jackson,
You're 100% right on that.
There's nobody worth getting. There's nobody.
I got Laporta in the 18th. So
yeah.
Laporta
is
when you look, so let's just hit on the quarterback point more so than
Vegas.
the
When you're 21, Recon, Vegas is nice. It's real nice. We got a couple of spots. It's true.
The thing with tight ends is once you get past about number 4, there is no difference from 5 to 22. So there is no value in taking them early. When you look at quarterbacks, on the other hand, there is a solid top 3 because they run the ball. I do think Fields deserves to be in that list next year. I think Fields is going to take off.
Fields will probably be up there too.
And especially if you're in a league that gives the 2 extra points for running over passing, it hurts the Dax of the world. Herbert's going to bounce back.
This statement is true.
I will be drafting. Well, I'm not saying no Chargers because I do believe Herbert's going to come back. I think they're going to put an actual competent offensive coach in place. And when you look at this,
but you're not drafting them high. That's the thing. Herbert.
I'm probably taking Mike Williams in the 5th round. I don't know if you consider that high or not. But
I mean, it's at value. I mean,
yeah,
it's not a little bit high. I mean, he probably should be 7th, maybe 8th, depending.
Yeah,
on
Mike Williams is probably on my team next year. Johnston is probably on my team next year.
That's a joke. Don't even say that. That's funny.
Johnston, oh, dude, I'd rather have him than Kelly or Palmer.
Dude, Johnston is going to go like 17th, 18th round. He's good for like your deep league, but not.
Dude, the rookie, he is going to have a great year next year.
I disagree. He didn't look like he could catch the backside of a barn.
He will be fine. Again, yeah. I had him as the number 1 receiver entering the league last year. He will be fine. He is in a situation that had no idea what they were doing.
But your statement, though, Joe and Recon, about tight ends does stand. So you look at outside of Laporta, Kelsey, and Hawkinson, who Kelsey and the Hawk were drafted higher. Hawkinson was in the 5th round. So outside of that,
Hawk was on pace for being the tight end of the year until he got hurt.
Outside of that, let's go from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So 10. You have Jake Ferguson sitting at 164. McBride at 170.
He will replicate. Ferguson will replicate.
Komet at 177, Njoku at 202 is
Should.
probably going to fall out. Kittle at 204, Evan Ingram at 208, and then the 3. So the disparity between these is not heavy. It's not a lot. And
See, Rico, I'm going to tell you right now, I would rather do 2 running backs early or just not do the 3rd round running back. And stack the receivers and trade.
Yeah, so
you also can't go in with that type of pure mindset.
But I think this year it's a good thought. So, Joe, bringing this up, it's a good thought though, because when you have
you're in a turn, right? You're going to be the last pick. Go running back, and never think about him again.
When it comes to it, I think that there is a value into going into your draft like this and thinking of positional weight, like we just did, going through and saying, we here believe that there's going to be probably about 20 wide receivers drafted in the first 3 rounds.
Mm-hmm. But he nailed the point. Running backs are volatile, but there's only 5 good ones. There's only 5 you can trust.
Running backs are
that being said, include Jonathan Taylor in that list, who missed 6 games.
Running backs are extremely volatile, and this is the second year in a row Travis Etienne is coming out and having a higher than 3rd round, and being a high percentage of his team's fantasy points. Another year where Christian McCaffrey's doing it. Another year where Breece Hall is doing it. Kyron did it. Jahmyr Gibbs.
Breece Hall might end up being the best running back next year.
It's scary to think about that. It really is scary. But
if Rodgers plays well and just plays, period, you're going to get running lanes open up. The Jets still need a line. That part hasn't changed.
The dead zone for running backs is going to be much higher in the draft order this year than it was last year, because in the dead zone of running backs last year were guys like Brian Robinson, guys like Rachaad White.
Well, Pacheco fell into that dead zone last year.
Yeah, Anthony Richardson will be a very good option for next year, I think. DeAndre Swift was in that dead zone. Pacheco was a little bit after the dead zone. And these are guys that were hovering around that 200 range that still produced a pretty good amount. But the dead zone is going to be a little bit higher because
I want Pacheco next year.
But all of these monster wide receiver numbers have been coming out over the last couple of years. And, even a guy like Pittman, for most people, has a high value. And yeah, his game is really much tied to what Anthony Richardson is going to be doing next year. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that he's going to slip below the 5th round. So, when we look at it, that dead zone that we were looking to get running backs really late in is not going to be there, because all of those running backs are going to go because there's no wide receiver value there anymore. Those running backs you're going to see the dead zone go up to 4 and 5, rounds 4 and 5. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be I'm not going to want to draft a guy like, let's just say Jaylen Warren in the 5th round.
Yeah.
Or Najee in the 2nd round. I don't want that. Or in the 3rd round. I don't really want that, depending on what the coordinators and stuff situation is. So, I think it's a really good idea here, thinking about what you actually want going into it and then being fluid from it.
This year more than ever, I think you need to take the 2 running backs, and because there are no other ones.
You just push that agenda all the time. You push that running back agenda all the time.
Always will.
It never stops with you. It never stops. You're always running back.
Yeah, well, for instance, in the keeper league, I'm going to be debating between Kareem Williams and Hurts. I'm going to be keeping Kareem.
Well, I'm keeping CeeDee, I think.
I think you should be keeping CeeDee Lamb. I don't think that one's a debate.
I got Patty. I got Patty here too. I got Diggs and AJ Brown. I might keep AJ Brown and CeeDee. I don't know. I don't think I can keep both of them.
Don't be expensive.
And I got Devontae, and I got Ayuk. Man, I don't know how I lost. That makes me so mad. You know why I lost? Derrick Henry. I blame Derrick Henry.
That's the answer. Because you didn't stack running backs, Bob. It's because
I did. No, I did, and then I traded them for Patrick Mahomes, and then I had Nick Chubb, and he got hurt. So I did stack running backs. I had a bunch of running backs, and boom. Yeah, please do, Recon. We'll over the offseason, we're going to be talking.
Yeah, we're going to be switching to Tuesdays from here until the draft, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And then after the draft, we'll give you the updated schedule then. But pretty much throughout the playoffs here, we're going to give Tuesdays the ring here until the draft. And like I said, we'll go from there.
And I think, Joe, next week will be a good conversation to have about tight ends and quarterbacks, since we talked a lot about wide receivers and running backs today.
Yeah, and then obviously we'll be diving into the actual NFL playoffs. So
yeah, oh man, they're looking spicy.
Yeah, well, there's just so much volatility going into there. So we take the Steelers, for instance. If the Steelers win, and that's still an if, they can finish anywhere from the 6th seed to the 9th seed with a win. So it is crazy right now. Everything that is out there tiebreaker wise. So do you want to jump through the bets here real quick, Bob?
Yeah, jump through the bets.
So the first one is the Saturday night game, Houston at Indy, a win and get in for the playoffs. Right now, Houston's the favorite. They should not be. Indy is a better team before you had the home field advantage. And I'm going with Indy to win that one and give me the 1 point, although I want them on the money line. So right. Indy is the first one. The second one we go to is why Week 18 is so hard. You get so many teams that aren't playing for anything. That being said, you need to dive into reasons people care. The Battle of Ohio isn't a textbook example of no one should care at all, right? Cleveland's already locked into the 5 seed. Cincinnati's out of it. No one's really playing. But when you look at the Browns, they have so much cap hell. There are going to be a lot of players that are playing for their contracts for other teams, knowing that they have to fight for not getting cut, or if they do get cut, where they're going to play. Regardless, that being said, it is not going to be a touchdown difference game. Browning has been caught. He has been exposed, and even Cleveland can't bench their entire defense. Cleveland will be within 7 points. So give me Cleveland +7 in the Battle of the Ohio. In what I feel like I've been saying every week since Halloween, one of the grossest games of the year that involves the New England Patriots. The over-under in this is 30.5. I think the Jets can throw 3 pick sixes, and that already puts us at 21. So Jets, New England over the 30.5. I actually project that to be a 38-point game.
Gross.
The following one, the Niners are not playing for anything, and they are going to be benching everyone.
Well, the Rams are too. The Rams are benching everybody as well.
I get that.
So Puka's playing, but he's only going to play to get the record, and then they're going to take him out.
I get that. When you have that happen, and you have 2 great offensive minds, and we're benching the defenses, they're going to be points.
You're benching the offenses too.
I get that. But I can tell you the 4th-string guy, Tutu Atwell, is getting a touchdown in this game, and they are going to hit
on the
the
Rams
over.
Too. I'm on the Rams too in that game.
No, I'm not on the Rams. I'm on the over. Points.
Well, no, I mean, like, logistically, I'm on the Rams because I think that they have better 3rd and 4th tier wide receivers than.
And both of them know how to use them. So over 41, I have a projected being 45 scored. I'm on the over in that. We get to a game that, quite frankly, I don't know how the hell Arizona got their 4th win. We still are under the 4.5. And we are on Seattle. Keeps me from being a liar on my safest bet of the year, Arizona under 4.5. So I'm going to be with Seattle minus the 3. And then the final one, the game of the season, it might be Buffalo wins or goes home. But for some reason, and I know the reason, it's popular opinion, Buffalo has been made a 3-point favorite in that game. This game essentially is a borderline toss-up with an edge towards Miami before you even turn on home field. So I am definitely taking the Dolphins plus the 3. I think it's going to come down to a last-second field goal regardless. And like I said, if you get 3 points in what's going to be a tight game, I want it. Obviously, Miami is never out of anything. Tyreek can do stuff. So going through the 6 in recap, Indy +1, Cleveland +7, over New England, over LAR, Seattle -3, Miami +3. Lots of dogs this week, over 60%. And by the way, if you were with us for every bet this year and you put $100 on every bet, you would be in the profit of $1,300 and change. Cool
That's a
enough.
nice one. That's a nice one.
That's
All right,
very good.
everybody. Peace out. We'll see you next week. And hopefully week 18 goes the way that you want.
Awesome. See you guys in the playoffs.